Hey, Faith Community Church, it's Mike Lawrence, lead pastor, and we're in the Dust to Diamond series. I want to start by thanking Pastor Dorian and one of our elders, Rachel Jackson, who spoke over the last couple of weeks and launched off this series. They did a great job, didn't they? I was off celebrating my daughter's wedding, my grandson's first birthday. What? I know, those are awesome moments. And they stepped in to speak and to pull out these teachings from Matthew as we take a look at how Jesus turns dust to diamonds, how Jesus looks at people and sees value in them and draws it out in a way that you wouldn't have expected, transforming them into something so priceless and invaluable. They take dust, they turn it to diamonds. I mean, you know how a diamond is formed, right? I mean, honestly, it comes out of something called carbon, which, is pennies a pound. And through a tremendous amount of heat and a lot of pressure, over billions of years, God changes and transforms carbon by turning it into this valuable gem. And then a master jeweler takes it and with his careful eye and steady hand takes this rough cut diamond and turns it into something spectacular. And that's what Jesus does with people. Matter of fact, that's what we're going to talk about today. How Jesus forms us and changes us. We look at ourselves as common, not really valuable material, but Jesus sees a diamond in us, and under his careful hands, he releases the beauty within us, changing and transforming us. So today, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go back into Matthew, right? So where we've been studying the life and teachings of Jesus as recorded by Matthew. So I invite you to open up your Bible app, go to the Gospel of Matthew, and hit 8, that's the chapter, and then go to verse 18. We're going to pick it up there. Somebody a long time ago broke all the books of the Bible up into chapters and verses, little numbers and sentences so you can find where we're going. Here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about 3 stories where Jesus says something totally unexpected to people. I'll talk about when I told the staff that they didn't have a job. Okay. And you talk about what to do when you can't sleep at night. Before we do that, let's pray. God, just take this moment. Take me, I know that I am a diamond in the rough, and use me, Lord, in a way that I don't anticipate. Go beyond my expectations in life to people. Challenge, refine, purify, perfect us through this message, calling us to serve. Lord, I pray for the people who are listening who don't feel valuable. May you use this message to show them how in Christ's hands they can become priceless. Amen. So look, we're going to start with this. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross the lake to the other side. And then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever I go." So we're in this exciting time in Jesus' life. Crowds of people are following Jesus. Jesus is doing miracles. His word and reputation is spreading everywhere. He's challenging the system. His teaching is invigorating. People are so excited to want to be around Jesus. And then a man comes up who's called a teacher of the law. Now, this is a person who studied the Bible and how people apply it to their lives so they could live in a way that was right with God. You would think that a person like this coming to Jesus under these circumstances would be exciting. It's like somebody walking into your job when it's taken off and saying, "You know what, I got the skill to help you." And you go, "Yes." You would think that that's how Jesus would respond. But look at what Jesus says. "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Okay, what does that mean? Well, here's the thing. This man came to Jesus with expectation and ambition. He could see the excitement of following Jesus and wants to be a part of that moment. But Jesus knows that if your expectations aren't right, if your ambitions aren't correct, that when serving him or following him gets tough, you're most likely going to pull back. And so Jesus is really testing him because Jesus wants him to understand all that means is like, look at, dude, I don't have a house. You're not going to get rich and famous from this. Jesus had no home, no retirement, no expense budget, no travel reimbursements. He sacrificed to serve God, and that's what it takes to follow after Jesus. What Jesus meant was, if you want to follow me, then examine your expectations. Let's be clear about this. Understand why you want to do it and what the reality is like. Because I've seen this throughout the years. People get to see some pretty exciting things that happen in this church. I mean, the worship is just amazing. The gifted musicians, they see what's happening in student ministries or children's ministries. They love seeing a Bible study leader maybe kind of like pull open the Bible, or the teachers from the platform, or the outreaches that are just, like when we collect thousands of shoes, or we hear stories about how people's lives are touched, and like, man, that's exciting, and I want to be a part of that. And we're glad to have you be a part of that. But if you don't understand the cost behind that, then you're going to be disappointed when you face difficult times. Because there is a cost to following Christ. World Vision taught me this. World Vision is a global nonprofit that just makes a difference of lifting people out of poverty. I've always been a big fan of World Vision. And I remember a decade or so ago, we were working with them, and they made this decision that if you're going to serve people and lift them out of poverty, then you need to live in the communities that you're serving. Now stop and think about that. Because World Vision works in some of the poorest places in the world. And what World Vision was saying is, look, I get it. You go and you live in a city, you're closer to a hospital or to better education or a nicer home or whatever, because that's what you want in life. But if you're truly going to help a community, then you should be a part of that community. If you want that community to receive your help and to accept you, join them in their suffering. And they also knew that if you're part of that community suffering, you're going to be motivated to lift it out. What happened? They lost a bunch of workers. But the people who stayed and those that they gained, man, those are tremendous people. Because they had passion, they understood the cost, and they were willing to pay it. I see this all the time at our church. I'm just completely amazed at the time and the energy that people put into serving here at the church. The musicians with all the hours that they put into it, or the adults who go off on a student retreat, missions trip and give up a week's worth of their vacation to come alongside the kids. I mean, this is just amazing time and energy and sometimes money that they invest into serving. I saw it with our portable baptistry. You may have seen a couple of weeks ago where we were baptizing people, and we had this huge new trough that we've created where we're going to be able to bring baptisms right into the worship service. I've reached out to a friend of mine in the church, Dave Kutz. David's the type of guy who understands this. And Dave invested into helping us by buying materials and crafting this trough and putting it all together into a baptistry. He brought it to the church, he filled it up, he tested it, he emptied it to make sure that it would work. And I remember when the first time we used it, Nate Killing and I came to the church at 5:30 in the morning, bleary-eyed, filling it up with water, heating up the water so that people can be baptized. There's like so much work that went into that moment that people don't see, the cost that's involved. And from that, though, from that investment of time and from that cost, you get to see Jesus do some extraordinary things. This is why we do it, but you just need to know it. I said to the staff recently, because I love our staff. We have such a tremendous staff. They have pivoted constantly with all the changes that have come our way, from a global pandemic to a flood in our church, and trying to make ministry happen for people. And when I looked at them, I said, you know what, guys? Because I understood this idea of the cost. I'm like, nobody here has a job. Everybody has a call. A job is something you do. You bring your expectations to the table, you get paid, you do your time, you go home. But a call, and this is what Jesus was saying to this teacher, a call is something bigger. A call is when God has called you to serve Christ. And so you put time and you put energy and you put attention and sometimes your own finances into making something happen. But you get to be a part of something huge when it does. So I said to the team, I'm like, guys, you are the people that God has called at this time in the history of our church, 300 years, facing a global pandemic, to serve, to guide the church through this great challenge, to care for people, to minister to people, to keep the gospel work moving forward. You're part of the history of this church now. And you also get the front row seat of what God is doing in the lives of people. But it's not easy, is it? That's why I call it a calling and not a job. Because we sacrifice for our call to see Christ do amazing things, front row seats. This is what Jesus was doing because he understood that if you don't have the right expectations, it's like a flaw in the diamond that devalues it. So he's trying to remove the flaw. This is another story. Because another disciple, this is another follower, says to Jesus, "First, let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury the dead." Like, what is that? First time I heard that, I got freaked out. I'm like, what's with Jesus? He's not going to let this poor guy go home and bury his dad who just died, or a family member go to their memorial service or something. But that's not what he's talking about. You see, this is a completely different time. I mean, this is the first century. It's a Middle East culture. And there was this commitment that you had to family. And really what he's saying about burying his parents is Jesus, I need to take care of my parents until they die. That could take years. It might be decades. Who knows how old his parents were? And Jesus is pushing back on him. Jesus is calling him to prioritize his relationships by saying, like, if you really want to follow Jesus and you truly want to serve Jesus, you can't keep pushing it off. And in this conflict that you may have of relationships, you got to really think through how you're going to prioritize and serve him with the responsibility of these relationships. I mean, Jesus had no family. That was a conscious decision that he made in order to serve God. We know that Peter had a mother-in-law, but then spent time away from her serving Jesus. We know that two other disciples, James and John, that they had a family with a family business that they walked away from in order to serve Jesus. And one of the great leaders, Paul, talked about his conscious decision to be single in order to serve God and to advance the mission of the church. Serving Christ, following Christ, takes a thoughtful commitment that will impact your relationships. So what Jesus is saying, if you want to follow Christ, you're going to have to examine your relationships, and you're going to have to make some difficult choices. Because there's a relational cost to following Jesus. You know, diamonds, in order to make a diamond, you have to remove a diamond from its natural setting in order to refine it into something beautiful. It takes, it takes it takes time to serve. You're going to have to remove yourself from home, from important relationships. You're going to have to open up your life to make time in order to serve. For the practice, the preparation, and whether it's giving up time with people you love to go, like vacation time, to go off, like I said, on a missions trip, or you're going to give up precious nights to come in and use the church kitchen to cook a meal to serve to people, or you're going to give up time with your family on the weekends every Sunday to be here to serve in order to welcome our guests and to help them feel comfortable to find a place in the community so they can discover Christ. Serving Christ takes sacrifice. You got to open up your life in order to do that. And this was something I learned as a dad a long, long time ago. I can remember the day when I was wrestling with the Lord about, thinking through this passage, because sometimes serving means you got to open up your life to spend time away from your kids or from your spouse or from your friends as you're preparing to speak or to teach or to lead or to do something video. Sometimes sacrificing means you got to give up time with your family on a vacation to go off to serve and to do something valuable for God. Or sometimes it means leaving home. And I was ruminating through all of these thoughts, and I was kneeling beside my bed. I used to go into my children's bed at nighttime, and I would kneel beside their bed and I would pray for them while they slept. And I remember wrestling with God and hearing God say to me, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to serve? And I wrestled through that because I began thinking, it's like, when you do ministry, volunteers are available at nights and on weekends. Same time your family is available, or the same free time that you have after you're done working. Or sometimes ministry called me away from my family. I can remember being on a missions trip with the teens, talking to my wife on my phone when my son caught his first fish on a fishing trip. And the feeling inside, that I had of like, wow, that cost me something to do this. And I could even remember sitting and thinking and praying, what if God called one of my children to leave, to go to a different place in America or in the world to serve him? Would I be willing to make that sacrifice? That's a hard decision to have to make, but Jesus is trying to push on us. If you're going to do something, and you're going to love radically, and you're going to live generously in order to see Jesus do the extraordinary, it's going to have an impact on your relationships. So you got to be willing to invest that time. Are you willing to make the sacrifice required in order to serve? Now, I want to put a little bit of caution in there, because your marriage and your family are your responsibility. I've always said, don't save the world and sacrifice your family. If you've been called to this husband, or you've been called to this wife to be their spouse, and you're responsible to care for them. And God has given you these children to nurture and to grow. So don't completely sacrifice those relationships, but know that serving is going to create a tension in your life where you're going to have to give up some time and put your energy. It's in like this ebb and flow of, is it ministry time or is it family time? But it's how we serve Christ in order to see him do extraordinary things in the world. Our volunteers do it all the time. It's what we do to serve in order to see Christ change lives. There's a third story. Jesus gets into the boat and his disciples follow him, and suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And then he got up, rebuked the waves and the wind, and it was completely calm. And the men were amazed, and they asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Think about it. So Jesus now is moving on. He's in a boat trying to get to the other side of the lake. He needs a break from the crowds. He's exhausted. He collapses in the boat and he falls asleep, and a storm comes up. Now here's the thing. It was a huge storm. And they were seasoned sailors in the vessel with Jesus. I mean, there were fishermen in the vessel. So when Matthew writes that the boat was being swamped and that they were afraid, there was a good reason to be afraid. These people have faced storms in the past, and this was a major storm. But Jesus is asleep. And for a long time, I thought, wow, I had to be pretty exhausted in order to sleep. But then, you see, as you read the Bible again and again and again, you pick up insights from it. Here's a verse from the Psalms. The Psalms are songs that are recorded for the lyrics to songs that we have in our Bible, written, spiritual reflections of people. And this was written by a man named David during a dangerous time in his life. It's Psalm 8, verse 4, where he says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." In peace I will lie down and sleep. And then this little 3-letter word is so important. For. It's the reason why he could sleep peacefully, even though the situation surrounding him was dangerous. Because the Lord will protect him. And Jesus knew that. I think Jesus was asleep in the midst of this moment because he had just a complete and utter trust in his Father. That trust in him gave him the ability to have peace in the midst of a storm. The disciples were panicking. Now look I'm not arguing about the right to be afraid. They're in the middle of a tremendous storm, and if a seasoned fisherman is afraid, then everybody should be afraid, right? That's not the issue. I mean, I think if I would be freaking out if I were them. The problem is how they responded. So these stories that we have of Jesus are sometimes recorded in more than one gospel. And when you read it in one of the other gospels, like this man Mark recorded the life and teachings of Jesus. And sometimes they add a little nuance into the story. And what Mark adds is the disciples say to Jesus, "Don't you care if we drown?" You know what they're saying? Do you love us? Do you even care about us? We're in the midst of this horrible situation, and you're asleep. You don't care about us. Do you hear what's happening? They let their fear undermine their confidence in Jesus and their belief that he could love them and take care of them. A better ending would have been to go to Jesus and to wake him up and to say, "Jesus, this is a really bad storm. We're worried about the boat. We know that you care for us. So help, please." Because Jesus, if you want to follow Jesus, you need to trust your Savior. following Jesus is going to lead you into some pretty difficult situations. You're going to hit some pretty tough seasons of life in following Jesus. And Matthew wants to be prepared. You have to choose how to respond. On one hand, we sometimes can fall into fear and anger, resentment, frustration with God. If you really love me, why would you let this happen? You hear that question? If you really loved me, why would you let this happen? We begin to doubt God's love and his compassion. I think what Jesus is trying to teach us through this, what Matthew is trying to communicate, is that there's another response where you can manage your fear differently by choosing a different response. Because I've always believed that, you know what? You can't control what you feel, but you can make choices about what you do with how you feel. And I think that's the point of the story here, is that we don't have to doubt God's compassion for us in the difficult seasons of life. We can recognize that this situation is really scary, but I know that Christ has not left me. So I trust him to get me through it. I see it in one of the other Psalms, like in the Psalm 3, David writes, I lie down and sleep, I wake up again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. You hear what he's saying? And no matter how dangerous the situation is, I can have peace because I know that God will take care of me. Look at, I have woken up plenty of times in the last 12 months, sometimes anxious, sometimes even a little fearful. Because look, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. And I don't know when it's going to end. And you get frustrated. God, how could this happen? Why would you let this happen? Or, the weight of leading the church through this season. And look, we had a pipe explode. And in the midst of dealing with the pandemic, suddenly we're not able to go back indoors like other churches are able to go indoors. And we're dealing with 2 staff members who have cancer. And I'm one of them. So yes, there are moments when my emotions strike me, where I feel anxious or I feel afraid, or times I've gotten frustrated even with God. And so then, what I do is I recognize these truly are challenging times. Take a deep breath, and I think about these moments in the Bible. The Lord will sustain me. God is watching over me. Jesus is in the boat with me. This isn't God above and beyond the storm, feeling bad for me in the storm. This isn't God disinterested that I'm in the storm. This is God entering into my storm through Jesus in the boat of my life to guide me through. And the incredible thing, right, is that I think the disciples would have seen a miracle either way. Jesus stands up, calms the winds and the waves. And when Matthew writes, they were amazed. That's a worship word. They had the opportunity to see a spectacular moment of God's power in their lives through Jesus Christ that amazed them. They didn't have to be afraid. I really think Jesus was going to do something amazing. They could have walked into that a little differently. And here's Matthew now giving us some pretty solid advice through these 3 stories. Matthew was leading a church that was facing persecution, expanding throughout the world, facing trials and tribulations in all these different nations, trying to figure out what they believe and contend with people, trying to change what they believed. And it was really hard to lead the church. And I believe that Matthew wrote these stories down to guide us, to help us to understand that following Jesus takes an intentional, thoughtful commitment where we have to examine our expectations and be prepared to sacrifice. We have to prioritize our relationships, where we have to sacrifice time and energy and money to serve, while also guarding the responsibility of our family. It takes that time. We have to trust Jesus in the midst of life's difficulties, not in not to respond with anger and fear, but to turn to him, to trust him, to guide us through it. You know how they bring out a value in a diamond? Well, they pull up this rock that they know is a diamond. And what they do is they literally find some of the hardest substances in the world, and they start to cut it and chip at it. They break it down into smaller pieces. They're looking for the most beautiful spot contained into this rough element because they want to release it. They're not trying to hurt it by taking off these aspects. They're trying to release the beauty that's inside of it. And that's what Christ is doing. In all this advice about examining your expectations and be willing to sacrifice in the relationships and to trust Christ during the storms, it's not that he's trying to break us down. He's trying to chip away the stuff in order to release the beauty and the value that's within us. They take this after they've chipped it, cut it, and literally cleaved it. They take it and they do something called brute force, where they use another diamond to go after this diamond and to create flat spaces and sand off the hard, dark and flawed aspects of the diamond. They use another diamond to shape that diamond. Just like Christ, we'll talk about next week, the great and precious diamond is used to release the diamond within us. And then they sand it down into 58 different facets to make it something spectacular. And it becomes something beautiful. This diamond in the rough is released into something that's precious. Now here's the thing. If you choose to follow Jesus, he's going to chip away at the flaws. He's going to cleave away the imperfections. He's going to sand out the rough spots. And he's going to fashion and form you into something spectacular. But you need to be willing to make the sacrifice, to follow through with the commitment, to endure through the hardship, and to trust Christ, not doubt him through it. And if you do that, you're going to come out a diamond. If you've never decided to follow Jesus, or if you tried following Christ and you hit a hardship or a difficult time and you just kind of walked away from it, come back. Because Christ wants to release the diamond that's inside of you. Follow through, don't give up, and see Christ do something spectacular. God, I just want to pray that you would release people through this message, that you give us the strength and the fortitude to follow you through these hard times. To trust you that in your hands, though you're chipping away and sanding down things and it feels hard, Lord, and the experiences that we're facing and the sacrifices that we're making, would you give us extraordinary moments that are amazing when we see the power of Christ at work in our lives? God, I love you and I trust you with this moment. I just want you to do something that I didn't expect in someone's life by listening to this message. May they become something precious in your hands. Amen.